Welcome everyone back to my YouTube channel. So I promised my Pro Tour video was gonna be the next video up. That is still coming up, but I kind of just want the modern challenge. So today's another really special impromptu episode where I have a very special guest in Universe come talk about Neobrand alongside me, as he's the mastermind behind why I play this, how I picked it up, and how I won with it. So can you introduce a bit about yourself, Universe? Who you are, who you're playing with, and yeah.
Yeah, hi Mara, thanks for having me. So I'm Universe from Finland. I'm predominantly a Magic Online rider right now, and recently I've been playing with World Council basically since the RC Turin, where we've had a bunch of good results, myself including. And yeah, most of my experience with Modern comes from before World Council. And some of my friends taught me to play the new From deck and actually told me that it's good, and I've been playing it ever since, on and off. And yeah, I think it's a very good choice for the upcoming Modern RCQ season, and it's very good that you won the challenge with it, so that we can spread knowledge about the deck to other people as well.
Yeah, I think, you know, when you always search up Universe on MTG Goldfish, you always see either Neobrand or Amulet Titan on your Modern Challenge top 8. So definitely no shy in results there. But also I just wanted to shout out, because you're also part of a grinder community in Team Grindstone, where you actually helped Xenowon do really well in the Mox showcase and the Mox itself with Neobrand, right? So just some hidden gem there.
Yeah, that's true. I actually, Xenowon was the one who taught me to play Neoform at the very start, back when I just started playing it. Xenowon was the one who told me that the deck was good, and I didn't believe him because, you know, how can this all-in turn to combo deck be good? And we're gonna dive into that, of course, during the video. But yeah, he was the one who taught me, and then of course I helped him prepare for the MOX as much as I could.
Nice. Yeah, so just to talk a bit about what this deck is about. So the name Neobrand comes from this hallmark card Neoform and Grizzlebrand, where you basically cheat out a Grizzlebrand through pitch casting an Allosaurus Rider and then sacrificing it to cards like Neobrand and Eldritch Evolution to basically get a creature costed bigger than Allosaurus Rider. Allosaurus Rider conveniently is a 0 cost creature that has the converted mana cost of 7, so that lets you get Grizzlebrand. Currently, with the way the deck is configured, your primary win condition is actually Ghalta Stampede Tyrant, where you get Ghalta and with the trigger you try and cheat out a Xenagos God of Reveler that doubles and gives haste to Ghalta to swing in for 24 or even 26 damage with Trample. So basically you get the rider and you cheat big dumb creatures out. Your main one being Ghalta plus Xenagos, the other one being Grizzlebrand, and also you can get Silver Bullet creatures like Urani, even Atraxa when you're low on life total. And you know, our good friend Frowny actually made a very funny video explaining on how Neoform works. You're also technically an aggro deck where you play out Allosaurus Rider on turn 1 and beat down with it, which doesn't, you know, come up very often, but it is still a good avenue to victory in certain matchups. So the matchup spread for this deck, as Universe you mentioned, it's a kind of all-in combo deck that is designed to, you know, spit out resources and go for a combo and protect it through pacts and prevent yourself from dying from pact using cards that consign to memory. But in general, you are very all in, so you're really good into non-interactive decks of the format. And since you're also one of the fastest combo decks in the format, you prey on all the other combo decks that are slightly slower than you. So that's decks such as Tron, Amulet Titan, and even Affinity and Storm. Your fine matchups are actually fair decks where, depending on your opponent's configuration, whether they play killer sideboard cards such as Containment Priest, that can swing the matchup in their favor. But in general, you're also fine into Blink decks and Boros Energy, where your game plan just lines up really well against theirs. And then your bad matchups are actually heavy permission interactive decks such as Control, and probably even worse are combo control decks that can actually put a real clock before you can assemble your combo through protection, like Gorios and Belcher. So these are the matchup spread in your mind, in our mind, I guess. But Universe, what do you think on the current positioning of Neobrand at the moment?
Yeah, so I agree with most of what you said. The one small remark I want to make is that like you don't really prey on Tron. Tron is a 50-50 matchup according to testing, because like they do have like a bunch of early stacks pieces that they can put on the battlefield, like Disruptor Flutes, or if they have an early Karn and whatnot. But yeah, overall, you are correct in general. And yeah, the current positioning in the metagame, I think it is very good for Neoform, especially online, where Boros Energy and Jeskai midrange are at the top of the metagame. Like, people do really love those decks, and they feel like they are well positioned, which makes Neoform a very good choice, because while yes, those decks are not biased by any means, you can still like mulligan to 5-4 and not find your combo pieces, or your opponent might have sufficient interaction in either counter magic or stacks pieces to lock you out of the game and still win. But if you play like 100 games, you are gonna win like more than 50 of them, like 55, maybe even 60 against like Boros. So I think that it is quite well positioned, and even more so with the counterspell decks being at their lowest they've ever been. Like, Belcher is basically out of the metagame. It has made a little bit of a comeback, but still not massive by any means. Dimir midrange in like Frog counterspell type of decks, they're just completely out of meta, and Gorios isn't very popular as well. So yeah, I think this is like a very good looking metagame for Neoform.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Like, I'm, very prone to playing decks like Gorios, but I would say like decks that prey on Neobrand are actually being suppressed down by the rise of Affinity, which is also a really good matchup for Neobrand, because you're faster than them. They can probably only keep up one disruption, so you can force through your combo most of the time. And post board, you have all these like disenchants and mystical dispute to prevent them from developing a really strong threat. So you buy yourself a lot of time to, assemble your combo with backup. So it's a really interesting deck at the moment, where it's probably the best level 2 deck, where if you're expecting all these Affinity, Boros, Blink decks to be level 1, suppressing down your bad matchup, that's when Neobrand is a really good choice, which is why I actually decided to give it a spin, to not only learn how to play Neobrand, but also to have this deck in your arsenal. So now to just talk a bit about, let's say, the configuration of the deck and the actual flex slot of the deck. You have your tutor effects here and here. You have like cantrips, but like really importantly, mainly green based cantrips in Planar Genesis and to a certain degree Wistfulness. You have ways to force through your combo in Pact of Negation and Veil of Summer. And then you have more green enablers, whether that's like lands, whether that's like endurance to buy back some of your fatties that went to the graveyard, or even playing cards like Nourishing Shoal and Replicate because they're green and pitchable to Rider. So out of the actual deck, probably the flex slot are these, right? So Grizzlebrand you always see, 2 Galters you always see in case you draw one. Urani you basically always see just because it's such a lights out threat, individual threat against Solitude decks. And Atraxa is pretty much always seen, but not many people know exactly why. So probably good to explain on that. Mandrills is not always a given. Wistfulness is a new addition. I guess Endurance is a functional piece that people are, very, very fast at cutting. And then Replicate, Shoal. So yeah, let's talk a bit about these cards one by one. Do you want to start with maybe Nourishing Shoal?
Yeah, I can open Nourishing Shoal for you a little bit. So basically, Nourishing Shoal is a pretty good game 1 card where you get the Grizzlebrand out, for example, against decks like Boros Energy, sometimes even Jeskai Blink, maybe Prowess. And you have to draw a bunch of cards. So let's say to get your Alazos Rider, you had to summon a Sparks for it, and then you don't have a consign in hand. So you have to draw 7 cards. And then you don't have the consign in the 7 cards, so you draw another 7. And if it's like Boros Energy, they might have Goblin Bombardment. If it's Prowess, they might actually have just Lightning Bolt or Lava Dart or something like that to kill you from that spot. So Nourishing Shoal comes up in those scenarios. Sometimes when you get Urani, your opponent, for example, if they're on Jeskai midrange specifically, they can go like Haste Flage and consign the trigger of it sacrificing itself and attack you for 12, gain 6. So it is kind of like a racing mode after you attack with Urani for the first time. And maybe they've gained some life from, I don't know, soliting their own things. So having the Nourishing Shoal can actually gain you enough life so that you basically get an extra turn of damage with your Urani, or you just don't die from the Flage attacks or something like that. So it does come up. It is like mostly sided out after game 1 against most decks except like basically Boros Energy and Prowess, because those are the decks where you want it most, and you need the like extra life the most often. But I like having it in the main deck against most decks because at worst it's just a green card that you pitch to Alazos Rider.
It's basically it sounds like a card that prevents you from losing in a quote-unquote winning position.
Yeah, basically. So if you're in a winning position, but like you're looking for a piece or you're like missing something, it might actually just be it might make the difference between you winning the game and you losing the game.
Yep, makes sense. So, I guess kind of related. Do you want to talk about Replicate as well?
Oh yeah, I mean that one is kind of straightforward. It's just a green consign. So yes, it costs 2 mana. Instead of 1 on consign, but if you're casting your consign to memory or the repudiate, you basically never cast Replicate. You already have 2 mana because most of the time it means that you went for new form the previous turn, and you either had to Pact of Negation your opponent's interaction or Summoner's Pact your Alazos Rider into your hand, so it means that you will have 2 mana most of the time, and like as you've mentioned, green card count is very important, and that's why we are playing these like green cards that are functioning as lands, and you even have them in the lands pile on your screen. And this is kind of a nod to the same thing where we want to minimize the non-green card count in our deck as much as possible. And so we are playing this 4th stifle effect in green instead of the 4th actual consign to memory.
Yep, sounds great. Yeah, let's touch a bit on the land pile, I guess, since that was a good segue. I would say like the one that comes up the most is actually a disciple of Fraley's. Not only is the actual creature not bad to put in with Galta to draw 15 cards and put yourself in a really high life total, the fact it's a creature on the front end, it does mean that you can like do things like pacting for the land, play the land, and then now you have this extra mana to hold up things like Veil of Summer or go for Eldritch Evolution. And it's just a really good card both side around. And its floor being just an untapped green land just makes it so that it fits the deck really well. Generous End, I would say, is the best one to develop your mana super early, because if you're able to do things like turn 1 Hedge Maze, turn 2 End plus Hedge Maze, that just lets you dig super deep without playing actual spells in the early turn while developing mana. So that's basically all you really want to do in the early turns. It's also an interesting way to actually get out of Blood Moon type of effects where you cycle this, get the forest, and maybe that forest lets you cast Eldritch Evolution. Maybe that forest lets you use the Boseiju to unlock your other lands to produce colors. And last but not least, Battle. Battle is the only non-creature flip MDFC we're playing, but it's probably the most impactful one when you have Grizzlebrand out, because not only does it let you like remove a problematic creature off your opponent's board, it gains you 9 life with Grizzlebrand, which is a whole extra activation. And that extra activation might mean you dig towards cards like Pact of Negation against, you know, your opponent trying to remove Grizzlebrand, or you draw into the Consign to not die to your Pact. There are also like interesting corner case scenario where you pitch cast a Rider pretty early and you go for a battle, or you go like Coatl into battle to remove their only threats. These are much less common than, you know, battling with Grizzlebrand, but still do come up.
Yeah, I think you've covered it pretty well on the like green land type of cards. Yeah, the most important is of course Disciple, yeah. And the one thing that you didn't mention with Disciple specifically is that it allows you to keep these kind of weird hands where you have like one land, one Summoner's Pact, and like a Neo form and maybe a Pact of Negation where it is the nuts, and you can draw either Azos Rider and then you can pact for Disciple so that it becomes a land, or you can draw a land and pact for Azos Rider. So like your pact also becomes a split card in itself. But yeah, otherwise you've covered it very well on Generous End, mostly being just like develop your mana early and dig for your missing combo piece, and Battle being important with Grizzlebrand, and sometimes even just pitch cast Riders and Coatls.
Yep. I guess next, because I'm really interested in this as well, is the Mandrill Atraxa package. Because you say Atraxa is always in the deck regardless of whether there's Mandrills or not, but I've always seen this two as a package together, where like Mandrills kind of serves as 5th Allosaurus Rider, that instead of requiring you to have more resources to pitch from your hand in the mid game where you've maybe already fetched and surveilled a bunch, Mandrills just lets you attempt to combo off with just 2 cards in your hand. Obviously, like, I'm seeing Atraxa as a package with Mandrills because Neoform, unlike Eldritch Evolution that lets you tutor out creatures that have up to X plus 2 of the mana cost of the creature you sacrificed, Neoform specifically says +1 mana cost. So you can't get, you know, creatures with less or more than that value. So, you know, in order to utilize Neoform with Mandrills, you want to get the 7-drop, and probably the best 7-drop that's also green is Atraxa. So I've always seen this two as a package together, but you told me that, you know, Atraxa is just good on its own. Can you just tell me a bit about these two cards together.
Yeah, so Mandros has like a bit of history in the Neoform deck. So like about a year ago, like last summer, we used to play like more Mandros. I think sometimes we even played multiple in the main deck, like 2 or 3, and then like the rest of the copies were in the sideboard. So in total, we would have 4 copies in the 75, and that was because like the blue decks were much more popular back then. Specifically Belcher. It was like the summer before the PT where Belcher won, and it was a very popular deck, so having more Mandros made sense. And right now, I would not cut the first Mandros from the deck, just simply because yes, it's like Rider number 5. That also doesn't require you to pitch your whole hand, especially when you mulligan, so sometimes it is even better than Rider. And yeah, against grindy decks like Jeskai midrange, it's a very good threat, sometimes even better than Rider. Against Boros, it can actually just be a decent blocker in the mid game while you're searching for your evolution and neo form. So it is a very flexible card in that way, and also it's green, so you can pitch it always. And Atraxa in itself, yes, originally it was like a target that you can neoform your Mandros into, specifically because we used to run like 2, 3, 4 copies in the deck. But right now, even if I were to cut Mandros from the deck completely, I would still put Atraxa in my deck, because like the opportunity cost of putting another green card is quite low. And having and like when you evolution your riders, when you are at a very low life total, let's say you mulliganed and you couldn't find it quite on turn 3 or even 4, like you evolution on turn 5, if you just get a Griselbrand, sometimes it's not gonna be enough. They might have like a Solitude or I don't know, like a Felia blinking your card or something like that, or even just put a lightning bolt on the stack on their turn. So you might want to look for Pact of Negation in that scenario. Or you might want a Vigilance attacker with lifelink that like can both attack and block on the same turn cycle. Those situations come up, and yeah, just making your Eldritch Evolution more flexible is always good. And right now it is even better with Wistfulness in our deck, where we can either hardcast the card for 5 mana in longer games, or we can actually scam it out earlier, like on turn 3, where you evoke it for one of the effects. Usually it is going to be the draw to discard 1, and then consign the evoke trigger, and then on the next turn you can Eldritch Evolution it into Atraxa. So it became much better as well.
Yeah, conveniently 5+2 is 7. And
Yeah.
also, so just to summarize what you said, essentially Atraxa, there are board state, especially when you've evoed in the mid game, where your life total is lower and can't activate Griselbrand safely. In those scenarios, Atraxa is essentially just a better Griselbrand, right?
Yeah. Like it's a better Griselbrand if you fear that you might not untap if you pass the turn. If you know that you're like 99% to untap, I usually still go for Griselbrand because it usually lets you, like after it attacks, it usually lets you actually win the game. And Atraxa, like you might miss a little bit and you might just be left with an Atraxa and maybe a protection spell. Like it does kind of whiff at times, but also like in those situations where you might die, the Atraxa trigger is much more valuable than the possibility of closing out the game in 2 turns, which you might not get if you don't tap.
Yep, makes sense. But from what I'm hearing, with cards like Mandrill still in the deck as a 1 copy, cards like Atraxa still there, the fact these are green just raises these cards' floor significantly for you to be able to include it in the deck. And like the fact you keep like one-offs of Mandrill's Wistfulness, Endurance is probably just a nod to Summoner's Pact, allowing you to, as long as you keep 1 copy of these cards in your deck, to have access to these corner case scenarios where you can still go for the combo in low resources. Like the way the deck is actually currently configured, you can threaten to combo with pretty low resources as long as you have the mana. So as long as you either have cards in hand or mana available, it just lets you combo without as much resources of the other, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and all of these one-offs, they like make your longer games much better. Where, you know, the games that end on turn 2 with either you putting a Griselbrand into play or even Gauta Xenagos or opponents just countering your Neo form. Let's say they are on living end and they have double force of negation up for your Neo form, and then the game basically ends on the spot because you don't have cards in hand. Like, yeah, those games are very easy. Like, you just put your thing on the stack and pray it works out. But the longer games where you either like mulligan or find something and you like actually have to think, how do you maximize your outs, how do you buy yourself the most time, and like what are the cards that allow you to do that the best. And like these flex slots I have been very happy with, and yeah.
It definitely sounds like, and I can confirm, you know, people always think of this deck as being super one-dimensional, super fast and furious, you know, glass cannon, you go for or you go home. But like, actually with all these new updates, all these deck building theories, the deck can actually play your long game pretty well. And just to round out, you talked a bit about the fact you can evo Wistfulness into a Traxor already, but besides that, Wistfulness, I view it as like a green preordain, where ideally you get to play preordain, but the fact that preordain is not a green card, not letting you pitch to Rider, kind of pushes Wistfulness as a better slot in the deck, right? Also, there's like corner case scenarios where from the main deck you can start interacting with your opponent's Vexing Bubble and things of that nature.
Yeah, so for me, Wistfulness is exactly as you said. It's just a green preordain. So in the past, the deck used to run one preordain, and there are some builds that run like up to 4 preordain, and those I think they're just much less consistent with the lower green card count. But yeah, Wistfulness acts as a green preordain, like it digs for your combo sometimes it just pitches to Allosaurus Rider. And like actually the most important matchup where Wistfulness is very good is Affinity, because the green mode of exile target artifact or enchantment, you can either get rid of their hate piece in Vexing Bubble or sometimes they play other cards. So that is very important, especially post board. And even in game 1, you can actually just exile their Urza Saga that they're banking on for their threats and actually killing you, and by yourself like actually sometimes up to like 5-6 turns where if they just draw like either their zeros or interaction or just lands, then it is like very good, and you get to like draw like 5-6 more cards in that game.
Yep. And it's also just another tutor target.
Yeah, true.
And lastly, Endurance, because you've seen me play, you've seen me ask you a lot of times, but I always just want to board Endurance out. So do you just want to touch and scold me for that?
Yeah, I can do that. So Endurance is a very important card, and so basically every time I start speaking about a card, I start with it's a green card, which just goes to show how much being green raises the floor of the card in this deck. Just being pitchable to Rider makes like the text largely irrelevant in most games. But what Endurance allows you to do, and this comes up the most often, I would say, against like Jeskai Blink decks and sometimes Boros Energy decks, where, for example, you go for Griselbrand, and then you start drawing, and then maybe they solitude your Griselbrand out of the Jeskai midrange deck, and then you realize that like you have drawn to both of your Gautas, or like you drawn mostly it's the Gautas that are important to get back into your deck. Or maybe Griselbrand wasn't enough, so you need to like evolution it for Urani, but you drew the Urani, so you want to like go over 7 cards in hand, go to cleanup, discard like the cards that you want to get back into your deck so that you can Neoform or Eldritch Evolution into them, and you can Endurance back, and stacking the triggers correctly, you can actually shuffle the Endurance back into the deck as well. And sometimes it saves you from Flages, sometimes it saves you from Living End, growing their graveyard very large. And the one deck where it also comes up is Ruby Storm, where they go for Fast and Flames and then you Endurance, and they just want to cry because they thought like you would have countered something else before if you had Pact of Negation plus Consign, and then you just get to like Summoner's Pact Endurance or just have the Nutty Endurance in hand.
Yeah. Actually, do you want to know a bit of history lessons for Endurance as well? Because actually the first, players that actually put Endurance in their deck is Worldly Council for Pro Tour Atlanta, where the funny thing is, like, right after, or maybe right before deck submission for the Pro Tour, like Sean from Team Cosmos, like, posted a little screenshot of the fact he submitted a deck, and the screenshot was configured in a really, really masterful way where you can see like the top part of like a few letters, and we were like, dissecting what that card might be, and we figured out it was an A and a T. So we were going through the modern format and we were searching for cards that had an A at the beginning and T in the middle, and we narrowed it down to 2: Artist Talent. But based on how far each of the letters were, we actually determined that it was Archive Trap. So our Neoform crew were like, oh no, Cosmos, they might be playing Mill. So how do we beat Mill? Oh, let's put an Endurance. And that's actually the, beginning of, how we put Endurance in a deck.
That's so funny. That's so funny.
But then the
Because
idea
actually-
was, instead of playing like, the 50 mana Emrakul, Endurance being a green card, and Endurance randomly being good against, like, back then, like, Belcher was the best deck. So against, Whir, into Lotus Bloom, into Temeshi, like, being good against Temeshi, being good against Gorios, being good against Storm, being good against Flage, just meant, like, based on the good card doctrine, like, the fact we put Endurance in the deck actually made our deck structurally better. But yeah, I was too busy cooking the Goryo list with the Goryo crew, so I didn't really know what was going on with the Endurance. So thanks for explaining though.
Yeah, it's actually very funny that like the card that basically accidentally got into the deck made the deck like much better, and I do think that it makes the deck much better in like especially in those grindy matchups where you're supposed to win, but then you just draw 2 of your Gautas and then you all of a sudden can't win because you run out of win conditions. Yeah, it makes it so good.
So I guess for you at least, I don't know if I still agree, but never cut Endurance even post board.
Yeah, I basically never sided out. Like the only matchups where I would side it out are the ones where I know for a fact that I am not going to run out of Wincons like Ruby Storm, Amulet Titan. But then coincidentally, Endurance is very good against Ruby Storm, and it can come up against Amulet Titan if they go for Aftermath Analyst lines. Coming from Titan experience, I know it's a pain. So yeah, basically never sided out. Like I usually find worse cards to cut than Endurance in every single matchup, so I never cut it.
Wow, just such a solid card overall then. GG's.
Yeah.
Alright, I guess just quickly touching on the sideboard as well before we go into the deep dive. But, you see the usual suspects. Mystical Dispute to fight opposing counterspells. Nature's Claim, a really efficient answer against cards like Grafdigger's Cage, cards like Vexing Bauble, but also just really good against decks like Boros Energy as well, where the really problematic threats out of their deck are also just Goblin Bombardment, Blood Moon, since the whole game plan of our deck just beats their creature side better. So, just a low opportunity cost efficient answer to permanents, similar to Nature's Claim, but a low opportunity cost in a different way. Boseiju, as a disenchant slash extra mana source for the post-board game when we actually want to be hitting more land drops and go for a combo with interaction backup. But yeah, do you want to talk a bit about the Caudal package? Because this was something at least you guys kind of came up with, right? Or Frowny did, our good friend.
I mean, yeah, Frowny, I think he even said that he wasn't the one who came up with it. I don't remember who was, but yeah, it was like one of the Frowny like teammates or friends, and they heavily discussed it and like, you know, came to the conclusion that the deck was good. And so the reason why it's good isn't like particularly because like Oculus or Icewind Coatl are such goated cards of Magic that you want to put them in every single deck that contains Neoform. That's just simply not the case. It is just a nod to Summoner's Pact and Pact of Negation being very bad in longer games where, you know, you're not trying, like, you're not looking to power out your combo, you're looking to like take the game in a bit of a longer direction and you know, build up your Wave of Summers and Mystical Disputes as your protection cards, and then go off a bit later, or even just, you know, aggro them with Alrazos Rider while trading to combo every single turn. And the pacts are really bad at doing that because the moment you cast a pact of negation or summoner's pact, the next turn you're forced to either tap out or spend another card in consign to memory or repudiate to counter the trigger that kills you. So yeah, we are looking to take those cards out of our deck post board in the grindy matchups, I guess, is what you would call them, mostly solid matchups. And you're looking to bring in Coatls and Oculus, where you cast Coatl, then you can actually like turn your extra Neoforms into like actual threats, because they have to counter it, otherwise they die to Oculus if they don't have an answer immediately, because it also gives a second body on their upkeep. And Coatl already replaced itself, so most of the time if they answer Oculus with like a Solitude, or if they counter the Neoform with Force of Negation, it's a 2-for-1 for you, because Coatl replaced itself and Neoform is just one card in that scenario.
Yeah, definitely. I remember when I first asked you about Caudal Oculus package, like, I think not enough people caught the pact as a whole, because people always think, you know, it's just such a fundamental piece of the deck. But having this package lets you, you know, shift away from a more all-in approach, especially, yeah, like you said, against these blink decks, against these slower decks, where your main way of losing is just drawing like dead, quote-unquote dead Neoforms that you can't really convert into a board presence without like sacrificing a lot of resources. It's just a really smart way, in my opinion, to utilize the extra slots in your sideboard. Like, I would say most times people see like this 5 cards in your sideboard and it's like infinite slots. But if you really think about it, the deck being like fundamentally green kind of limits you in the type of cards you can put in your sideboard. Like, you'd rather not play artifacts because they're colorless, and you know, you can't really use it outside of it being an interaction. You already have really efficient interaction, and you being a proactive deck, you don't really want to be interacting with what your opponent is presenting, but more you want to be, you know, presenting something for your opponent to deal with. So I'd say more than not, you kind of have these slots lying around here and there where you'd probably use it for, like, I don't know, a 4th Veil of Summer, 4th Consign to Memory, where statistically your percentage of drawing those cards moving from like 3 to 4 is not as high as moving from like obviously 0 to 1, but like 1 to 2 or something. So I think it's just a very high yield way of using this extra sideboard slots lying around. I'll also say I'll be mentioning that in the later part of the section where I actually delve into the matchups I played in the Modern Challenge I won. But without Oculus, there are just some matchups that are really, really hard to win. Whether that's like Belcher, Gorios. So yeah, just a really good way of trying to win those matchups as well. And last but not least, can you talk a bit about Elishnorn Grand Xenobite?
Yeah, Elishnorn is mostly just a card that's like the 15th sideboard card. Like I didn't know what to put, so I put Elishnorn to respect Boros Energy a bit more. Like it is a card that ups your win rate against energy quite a bit because like you are allowed usually to keep like a bit of a slower hand with Eldritch Evolution and not like turn to Neo form in that matchup. And sometimes if they go really wide, those are the games where you don't win even if you get a Griselbrand. If they have like, you know, by the time that you get Griselbrand, they have 15 cat tokens and then they drop a Goblin Bombardment, and post board you're cutting Pact of Negations against them. So, you know, you cannot really answer Goblin Bombardment on the stack anyway, so you usually just lose. And Elishnorn is a very elegant way of dealing with those types of games that you would otherwise just straight up lose. Also, sometimes, like you would say that, but Uni, it's not very often that you draw like specifically Eldritch Evolution or Hooting Mandrills plus Neo form. And yes, but if you go for Griselbrand first, on the turn after, you usually can actually go Eldritch Evolution your Griselbrand or a new Alazos Strider that you drew into an Elishnorn. And you can get it on the battlefield that way and kind of seal the deal and just attack your opponent down in a couple turns where they can't really do anything in that spot anyway, after you've drawn like 14 or sometimes even 21 cards with Griselbrand.
Makes sense. But it's kind of a nod to the Boros Energy matchup, you know, being closer than it seems because they're just super efficient and proactive as well. And it's also kind of a nod to the fact we have a lot of sideboard slots lying around, right?
Yeah, it kind of goes to the same point that you covered in the overall like Coatl plus Oculus. Floodmo is probably the card that I get the least from the deck, and it's I think I've first seen it from my friend Xenowan when he like won, I think 3 challenges back to back with Neo form, and yeah, it's just like a cheap answer. It's like I think it is more of Nature's Claim number 4 than Boseiju is. Like we can cover Boseiju a bit later, but yeah, into the Floodmo it just bounces any non-land permanent, and most of the time those targets are going to be Vexing Bubble, Grabdigger's Cage, Blood Moon, sometimes even Containment Priest, because people do tend to play that in like Boros Energy when New Form becomes too popular. We've seen it sometimes. Jeskai decks are going to play Ashok Dreamrender, which is like literally unbeatable outside of Into the Floodmoor or Hardcast Mandrills, Pitch, Awazos Riders, and stuff like that. That's very tough to deal with. Sometimes you get got by High Noon where you need to go off right now. Let's say there is like a bunch of creatures on the battlefield from your opponent's side already. So you can like Into the Floodmoor that card as well. So yeah, most of the time it acts as a Nature's Claim, but sometimes it can also like bounce your opponent's flages that they escaped, or even better if they went like haste flage with Arena and consigned the evoke trigger, then you just flood mode that card and you're so much ahead. Because they spent like 2 cards from their hand to do that, and now it's back in their hand and they only got a Lightning Helix out of that. So it is a very flexible card in the sideboard of this deck.
Yeah. It's also really, really, really funny in the mirror match where if your opponent goes for like Galta plus Xenagos, you just flood more. And
Yeah,
they
that's
just,
true.
you know, stuck with nothing in play. Yeah, do you want to talk about Boseiju? Because I think I covered most, but probably missed really few important info.
Yeah, so the most important thing that you missed, like, you know, of course, it's just a disenchant after all. Like, there, how much can there be to talk about? It gets Flexible Cage, Blood Moon, whatever your opponent might put on the battlefield, of course. But one important reason why it is in the deck, in my opinion, is that it ups your land count for the grindier games where you want Coatl and Oculus. Where if you look at the deck list, like at your 60 cards that you have in your main deck, there's like only 15 actual lands, and then there's like 3 green lands and 2 ants, so it's like 18 plus 2, which is like very low. But it also kind of is reasonable to only play this little amount of lands, because you usually only want like 2 or 3 mana max, and flooding out is a much bigger downside than being mana screwed, because you cannot pitch the extra lands, but you can pitch the extra cards that you have in your hand lying around when you drew the second or third land that you needed for your evolution or neoform. Post-board, that dynamic kind of flips, where you are maybe looking for the land-heavy hands a bit more, because you can just cast your Coatls or Planar Genesis and then Coatls and Neoforms a bit later in the game. So you want to up your land count by 1, and that's why I like Boros, especially in the matchups where I can foresee myself using one of them as a spell, like as a disenchant for Vexing Wobble or Urza's Saga, or maybe even against Belcher as a Stone Rain, or a disenchant for their hardcast Belcher and pass turn. So having the second Boros is like very free, and it ups your land count in those longer game scenarios.
Yeah, makes sense. So you basically see these 6 as a package together, right?
Yeah, kind of. Like Boros is definitely not needed. You can like cut it. Some people actually play like 1 more fetch land in the deck and cut a forest, and then play the other forest in the sideboard for the same reason that I play Boros. I kind of decided that I just want to have the 3 basic lands in my main deck, so that I can cast Eldritch Evolution through Blood Moon in game 1 as well. And just have the second Boros in the sideboard, because I do value the extra Boros effects a lot more than other people do, in my eyes.
Yep. And I guess also shout outs to Frowny, who came up with the, was it Casalia Ambusher plus Omnath and Lush Portico package, where I guess the idea is, you know, it doesn't cantrip like Quaddle. You can't really bring it in against decks like Belcher and Goryo's, but it's just such a hard-hitting silver bullet strategy against Boros, right?
Yeah, so that's kind of it polarizes your matchup spread even more than it is polarized already, where you actually make your Boros matchup extremely good. Like you flip it to like from even maybe a little bit favored depending on configuration of both decks, to like actually like close to an unlosable matchup where you can answer the early Ragavans with Quasali, then you morph into Omnath, and then all of a sudden you can actually start hard casting your Uranus and Atraxas and whatnot. So that's like an interesting dynamic. But it makes your other matchups like Belcher, like interactive decks, a bit worse, because you don't get access to Coatl and Abhorrent Oculus package. So yeah, I don't personally like it, but I like the idea of, if we are in this very Boros focused meta, I would actually prefer that build over Ice Fangs and Oculus.
Makes sense.
And yeah, and Lush Portico is also in there instead of Boros.
And the thing you mentioned about Omnath into Uranium is like the second ability where you produce 4 mana. A lot of time you know, Neoform or Evo the Ambusher, so it's probably like turn 3 or 4, mostly turn 4, and you fetch, and that gives you enough mana to hardcast Uranium. Hardcast Galta, I guess.
But yeah, mostly it's Uranian Galta, or you know, just in general, giving you more mana to like Eldritch Evolution your cards into other cards, maybe like hardcast Wistfulness and evolution it into Atraxa or something like that. Like those things do come up in that build.
Makes sense, which is why you see more Wistfulness in those builds as well. All right.
Yeah.
So that's the deck dive in terms of the configuration, the card choices, and the reason behind this updated deck list for Neoform, the next part of the video is going to be talking about how to approach, sideboard hate pieces, which is the most important concept for playing a combo deck like this, and then also be covering the actual matchups I played in the Modern Challenge. Thanks for clicking on the video. Before we continue with it, let me quickly thank my sponsors over at Ultra Pro. This video is brought to you all thanks to Ultra Pro and their Apex Sleeves series. Like the Bob Ross one on my screen, these sleeves are the absolute apex and the pinnacle of the market in terms of sleeves. Their durability, shuffle feel, and gorgeous design are absolutely one and only, so please check them out from the link below. Like Ultra Pro said, you all collect, we protect. Alright, back to the video. Pieces your opponent can present against you are like lock pieces. So these are like Vexing Bubble, Grafdigger's Cage, and even like High Noon and Damping Sphere to a certain degree. Do you just kind of want to talk through how to play against these and what decks that could have these are more problematic than not?
Yeah, certainly. So Vexing Bubble is by far the most popular piece of like permanent based hates that people can bring against us, and that's because it's colorless. It's 1 mana. They can sacrifice it to draw a card if like they think that they don't need it, and it can slot into any deck. And the fact that it's so cheap and can be actually tutored by Urza Saga as well makes it so good. What it does against our deck is that it stops us pitch casting our Rider, and that's actually like pretty problematic because in these builds we only have like access to 1 Hooting Mandrills, which is not a lot of Hooting Mandrills, and we don't get access to it through Summoner's Pact because it also costs 0 mana, so it gets countered by Vexing Bubble. So for the most part, this stops our combo completely, and we need to deal with it before we can go for it. That being said, most decks are going to only have this postboard against us, and postboard, if you look at the sideboard, we have like Wistfulness, Boseiju, Tree Nature's Claim, Into the Flood Move for it, and we'll like in the main board we also have like 1 Boseiju, 1 Wistfulness that can deal with it. So we are not completely caught to it in the game once either. And so the way we beat those kinds of cards is with disenchants, simply. But yeah, the most kind of important thing to remember is what kinds of decks can have those cards. And while Vexing Bubble, you can see it out of Boros Energy, Affinity, and basically a wide array of other decks that usually don't play it, but they can play it depending on whether or not they expect Neoform to be popular. Mostly it is going to be those decks, and other pieces of like permanent based interaction are Grafdigger's Cage out of mostly Affinity once again, and there's also High Noon that Jeskai players sometimes bring in. So first, I'll talk about Grafdigger's Cage, and that card, it doesn't stop us completely like Vexing Bubble does, but it does stop us from searching with our Neoforms and Eldritch Evolutions, because like it says that the creature cards cannot enter from libraries. And so that just means you could either have to like take the beat down row and attack with your Allosaurus Rider and play the Delver strategy that Myra mentioned in the previous section, or the other way you beat it is obviously disenchant or consign to memory it on the stack, and same with Vexing Bubble. So yeah, that's the way you beat that. And the third big one that's currently present in the metagame is High Noon out of specifically Jeskai Midrange or Jeskai Blink, whatever you want to call the deck. And I honestly don't think it's very good. So what it achieves is that like the Neoform player cannot really go for it in one turn. They have to first like pitch cast Allosaurus Rider, pass the turn, and then they can like Neoform the turn after. And why Jeskai Blink players play it is because it gives them a window to solitude the Allosaurus Rider before I get a chance to Neoform it into something much bigger and scarier.
So usually the dynamic there is to like hold your cards and not even pitch cast our Outrider if you expect them to have Solitude, because usually you cannot afford to lose 3 cards in that matchup. It's very critical, and in that scenario you usually either try to like Basage it, or you just play the flash game with your Icefang Coatos, your Planar Genesis, your Consigned to Memories, Mystical Disputes, or just Wistfulness at Basage it. That also works.
So it's probably, again, a card that benefits more from a deck like Goryo's, where structurally, like, they don't give so much time to Neoform to kind of wiggle its way out of the High Noon lock. Also, one thing to definitely note is against Vexing Bubble, since it's a trigger, and since the trigger counters, you can actually fight through Vexing Bubble by consigning the trigger and also just by casting Veil of Summer beforehand, making your spells uncounterable. Like, you only draw if your opponent casts a blue or black spell, and you and your permanent only get hexproof from blue and black stuff, but the uncounterable clause is actually just irrelevant of the color, so it actually counters Vexing Bubble's counter trigger. So that's also why, like, Xeno 1 and you never fully board out Veil of Summer against, like, let's say Boros Energy and Amulet Titan that can easily have Vexing Bubble, right? Because, like, at worst you pitch it to Rider.
Yeah, I mean, against Boros Energy, I just have enough cards to side in, so usually it does come out by the process of elimination. But against Amulet Titan, like, I don't want as many cards as I want against Boros. Like, I don't want the Elish Norn. Sometimes against Boros, I'll side in 1 card on the play. So yeah, and against Amulet Titan, I usually do tend to like keep in 1 or 2 Veil of Summers. Like, it's not like a large part of my sideboarding strategy, but yeah, at worst it just pitches to our Outrider, and at best it can actually like save you a game where you have to go off under Vexing Bubble, and there's like no other way to do that.
Cool. And then the third section of the potential hate pieces or hate cards your opponent can play against you are like the overrated ones, which are High Noon out of non-solitude decks and Consigned to Memory, as well as Surgical Extraction. Can you talk a bit about like why Surgical is bad? Because that's probably the most interesting one, where people immediately look at Neoform being a all-in combo deck and just immediately think, oh, but Surgical is good against combo deck.
Yeah, so with Surgical, the thing is about the Neoform deck is that it's super redundant. Like, you have 8 copies of your Neoform effect in Neoform and Eldritch Evolution. So, surgicaling one of those doesn't completely eliminate the possibility of the combo. And while we have less copies of Alazos Rider, like we don't have the full 8, we still have access to 4 Summoner's Pact and the Hooting Mandrills, and sometimes even Wistfulness can work in that slot with the Eldritch Evolution. So, like, one Surgical, it never fully stops the possibility of the combo later in the game. And also, like, the biggest reason why Surgical is not as good is that it is a card in your hand that you have to use, that you have to spend, that can usually be better used to either win the game by, synergizing with the whole rest of your deck, or it can be used as a better interaction piece that they can side in. So basically, not sideboarding in that slot is better, and sideboarding a better card in that slot is usually better. So Surgical is just not very good because of those reasons.
The next set of overrated sideboard cards against you is Consigned to Memory in my mind. Can you just talk a bit about why Consigned to Memory is overrated? Because it stops Scalded Trigger and stops Atraxa triggers, right? Also, there are moments where it stops your opponent's replicate trigger from Consigned to Memory, which might just kill them from their pack triggers.
Yes, so Consigned to Memory has some applications against Neoform, of course. As you mentioned, stopping the Gauda triggers and the Atraxa trigger is like the most common way or the most common reason why people do bring in Consign against Neoform. But you have to remember that a good Neoform player is going to remember that, you know, you're a blue deck, you might have Consign to memory, and you probably do because, you know, there are still a bunch of Eldrazi decks running around, so you cannot really not play the card in your 75 completely, and you might run it. And so unless I have to go specifically for Gautek Xenagos, I will try to like play around Consign by either getting Urani in like just Link match, or Griselbrand because it doesn't have any triggers to be countered. And yeah, the most important deck where you have to remember about Consign is of course just Link because they run up to 4 copies in the main deck. So yeah, they're going for Gauta is bad for the reasons of, you know, them might have Consign, and also they might have Solitude, so even if you have Xenagos, you don't necessarily win with your Neoform, especially if you committed pacts on the turn. So yeah, there I almost always go for Urania or Griselbrand.
Yeah,
And
makes
for your point about, you know, countering your opponent's replicate on their Consign for their multiple pact triggers. So for multiple pact triggers to go on the stack, what had to have happened is they go for Summoner's Pact for our Zeus Rider or a land in Disciple, and then, you know, they cast the Neoform, then you counter it, they counter back with the Pact of Negation, and then they don't have 4 mana to like double kick on 4 of them, and like it just seems very narrow, and in those spots they might just actually, like, if they went for Griselbrand, they might draw into another Pact of Negation, you know, they might just counter your Consign completely as well.
Okay, so it sounds like a similar thing to Surgical, where for it to be really good in the scenarios, that's good. So for it to reach its ceiling, it just needs to have a lot happen. So it's like high demand in order to get the high ceiling, and really low floor in order to get, you know, like the average case is just low floor. Because I guess like against Neoform, like the opportunity cost of you having a dead card is just you lose the game against Griselbrand. So just have to be mindful of that for sure. And I guess another thing with Consign is post board, it's often like in conjunction with Mystical Dispute. Your opponent can have like either one, if not both, in the deck, or like have both, right? So like if your Neoform has Resolve and your opponent has 1 mana up, it probably means that they didn't have Dispute. So you can probably pretty likely deduce that they're sitting on a Consign to memory. So that like intuitive guess, or let's say like that quote unquote face up information, just should give you a good idea to play around the Consign in those scenarios as a Neoform player. Like the main thing, like to reiterate, also with cards like Nourishing Shoal, is once you're resolving your Neoform, from there you just have a massive advantage on the game. So it's less about winning at that point, and it's more about how not to lose.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And then that's pretty much the overrated sideboard cards. The next section of the video, I'm going to be talking about my experience in the matchups I played in the Modern Challenge that I won. And I'm going to be talking about how I actually sideboarded. The first round, I actually was the only loss, and it was to Affinity. The way I actually boarded was I boarded in the Dispute as it fights the counterspells and contests problematic bombs like Emery and Kappa. Nature's Claim, super efficient answer, as well as a Wistfulness and a Boseiju. So I boarded in these 8 cards. Bear in mind, my list is actually slightly different to the actual one I played in the Modern Challenge. However, the way I sided was I actually sided the Endurance. Don't scold me.
I
sided
actually like
the Mega.
Affinity is the only matchup where you can afford to side out the Endurance.
Oh, cool.
It's like Affinity, Tron, and the Mirror are the 3 matchups where you can actually afford to side it out.
And I sided. Sorry. I sided like this.
Yeah, I think this is like mostly correct. This is like so usually other people that I've talked to, like Xenoan, they don't side out like Hooting Mandrews and Atraxa, but they also do have like a couple cards less to bring in against Affinity. So this seems fine to me for the most part. Yeah, I guess bringing in Basejo, like because you're not signing in Coatl in this matchup, I could see trimming like a forest or a fetch land. Probably a forest because most Affinity lists don't play Blood Moon instead of the Atraxa that I would like to keep in. And I sometimes, or quite often, I actually cut the 2 mana Consign to Memory. I don't remember what the card's called. Instead of the Hooting Mandrews. Because like, you know, having access to Hooting Mandrews, Atraxa, or, you know, just Atraxa is, in my eyes, valuable enough to have access to against Affinity. But yeah, otherwise this is fine, and even how you sideboard it, you know, I would be pretty happy in running that configuration post-board against Affinity as well.
Right. Just reading my matchup notes, I always write during my challenges. I actually wrote that. So the key thing is to develop your mana and prepare for a potential long game. More mana means the more ways you can interact with your opponent. And more mana also means you can go for like a combo with Veil backup. I also mentioned that there are play patterns where you can go for Wistfulness, consign the Evoke trigger, and that lets you Evo for the Atraxa, so you should leave in the Atraxa. I also mentioned that the Mandrills could be good, just depends on how aggressive your opponent uses the Tormod's Crypt and how many they leave in. Tormod's Crypt from the Affinity side is a 0-drop that helps them develop towards a Kappa Cannoneer. So there's just a cap to how many they can actually take out. So they're pretty priced into keeping some numbers of Tormod's Crypt. And if they're like got Hooting Mandrills in their mind, they should actively be using it to prevent us from delving. So it's just something to see based on how your opponents play. So yeah, probably this 8 cards out for these 8 is the way to go. Key cards out of our deck, like I said, is the hit land drops. It's killer cards like Wistfulness. It's Veil of Summer, of course, and it's obviously the interactions we have post board. On their side, though, also because I play Affinity quite a lot, the really important card out of Affinity to play against Neoform are Mystical Disputes, or the counterspells, and especially Emery and Force of Negation. Emery as a card basically acts like a Psychic Frog, where in conjunction with Mishra's Bauble, it lets them continuously have the source of card advantage from really early in the game that could even potentially be played before we can have a Force of Mystical Dispute left up. And that source of card advantage lets them develop and interact against us. So kind of removes a bottleneck from their side. Force of Negation is also another card that's pretty important in this matchup, as like Universe said, one of the ways we fight against Affinity's counterspells is to actually interact with their mana sources that they can cast their counterspells. So that's like Wistfulness on the Urza Saga, Nature's Claim on one of the artifacts so they can't be improvising the Metallic Rebuke, things like this. And Force of Negation being able to kind of counter out of nowhere is really, really important. So the second matchup is Tron, and I actually won the matchup pretty convincingly, where game one, I just went for a Grizzlebrand and basically played like a clock permission game with Consign as interaction while attacking with Grizzlebrand 3 times. Game two, I basically just let them map, let them do whatever, and went for a turn to Galt. And the way I sided in, because we're always expecting the permanent based hate out of Tron, I was mindful of things like Vexing Bauble. So I boarded in the Disenchants, I boarded in the Floodmaw, I boarded in, let's say, the Boseiju. The Boseiju was actually the fourth consigned to memory in the sideboard, which I've no longer been playing. And then I boarded out Urani, as it's not really a Solitude matchup. I boarded out an Endurance. I boarded out a Mandrill, a Traxa, and one Veil of Summer. I was thinking of potentially signing out a Nourishing Shoal, but I was thinking like there's probably games where I just go for a super early Grizzlebrand with the Green Pact, so I'll want to use the Nourishing Shoal to dig towards a Consign effect. So I left that in. But what do you think?
So I think that so let's say Tron is not as easy as it sounds. So some games are going to go, as you described in your games. But yeah, often, and I would say it's actually like kind of a 50-50 matchup where it's heavily decided by the Dire who gets to develop their cards first. And they actually do have a lot of like stacks pieces that they can interact with you with. And against those, and most of those, Pact of Negation is actually not very good. And if you think about it, if you already resolve the card, the main way they can remove it is with like a Devourer or a Nugan trigger. And Pact of Negation doesn't hit either of those, so you are actually looking for consigns more than the pacts. Because the cards themselves, they either don't do much or don't do anything. So yeah, instead of siding out the Veil of Summer that can help you fight through Vexing Bubble and Atraxa and Hooted Mandrills that can actually come up in those longer games where your opponent establishes a Vexing Bubble that you cannot answer, yeah, I would actually side out Pact of Negations. And I would probably side in Wistfulness as well and side out the Show, even though it does have applications, as you mentioned, and I would think twice about siding it out. But I think with having the Wistfulness in the sideboard, it just makes sense to swap it for a Show.
Makes sense. So updated sideboard is as follows. The third matchup is Boros Energy, which I actually played against multiple times throughout the challenge. Most notable in the challenge was my round 3. I went for a Urani on turn 2 rather than a Grizzlebrand with Consign already in my hand to counter the pack trigger. And I just thought Urani not only dealing with like their Ragavan, but also just 2 swings to killing them was more safer than Grizzlebrand. But what do you think on this decision? Do you always just go for Grizzlebrand anyway, or?
Oh no, there are definitely spots where I go for Urani against Boros. Basically, the deciding factor for me usually is the texture of the rest of my hand. So what do the rest 0 to 2 cards in my hand look like? That's like a big factor in it. So as you said, like if you didn't have Consign, you could not have gone for Urani in that spot. Also, how wide their board is. So like let's say they have 7 cat tokens because you didn't find Neoform on turn 2 or turn 3, you might have found it turn 4, so they have quite a wide board. So Grizzlebrand can actually be not enough if you have to look for a Consign and they have a Goblin Bombardment where they can sacrifice the one that you're blocking with Grizzlebrand and you don't gain life and you die that way. So there are definitely spots to go for Urani. But I would say more than 50% of the time, like probably like 70 to 80% of the time, I still go for Griselbrand or Gauta if I have Xenagos.
Yep, makes sense, makes sense. And then sideboarding, what I did was I brought in the Nature's Claim as I was thinking that the problematic permanents are the stacks pieces, and then the problematic threats out of my opponent was actually cards like Goblin Bombardment and Blood Moon. So having that floor of dealing with those, as well as the ceiling of dealing with like the critical stacks pieces, was really important. I also boarded in Floodmaw as a way to gain tempo and universal answer, and also Wistfulness. So I boarded in these 5 cards and boarded out the follows. So I boarded out 3 Veil and 2 Pact of Negations, but I'm not sure whether I should be boarding out 3 Pact of Negation and 2 Veil, leaving 1 Veil in case of Vaccine Bauble and the green count, or whether I should just keep 1 Pact of Negation just in case I go for like a Griselbrand and counter like a Goblin Bombardment. What do you think?
So I personally tend to usually keep the like one-off pacts of negation more than other people, but against Boros Energy, I just don't think that it's really needed. You cannot really like if you don't have the pact and or consign in hand, you cannot really afford to like draw 14 looking for the 2 of those. Not very often at least. And yeah, I'm also not quite sure that you're supposed to bring in Wistfulness. That is going to depend on the texture of your opponent's sideboard. If they are higher on Blood Moons, then Wistfulness becomes worse because it's much harder to cast. And if they are higher on like Vexing Bubbles and or High Noons, then I would consider the Wistfulness
Yeah.
a bit more. But yeah, what I usually do is, the Nature's Claim, the Floodmaw, Eyelash Norn if I have it, and the Boseiju in for 3 pack, 3 Veil, and that's just a clean 6 for 6 for me.
Yep. And yeah, I didn't board in the Elishnorn because I actually didn't have it in my challenge winning list. But now thinking about it, super, super good to have to make it a clean cut. In terms of the actual gameplay, really interestingly, game 2, I went for a Ghalta line instead of a Griselbrand because I already drew the Griselbrand in my hand. So I went Ghalta and put Griselbrand and Disciple into play, and I sacked the Ghalta to gain 12 life. And that alongside Griselbrand just kept me at a really, really high life total for me to just not be cheesed out of a win. So definitely something to look to do when you can to lock up the game.
Yeah, and against Boros, the most important card you have to think about that can actually be annoying to deal with during your combo turns is Orim's Chant, where if you go for Summoner's Pact and they Orim's Chant in response, you cannot cast the Rider, of course, and if you don't have the Pact or the 4 mana to pay, then you're literally dead. So that's something to keep in mind in the post-board games, but it does come up very rarely. And usually you can play around it in one way or another.
How do you play around it?
Mostly just don't go for it if you don't have to, or have Consign already in your hand, and that's why you can afford to like go for Summoner's Pact, tutor the Rider, they go Orim's Chant, and on your turn you Consign, and then go for Rider Neoform. So basically, just keep it in mind and don't die to your pacts if you don't have to. Of course, if you have to go for the combo, you go for the combo and pray they don't have it. But if you have the luxury of playing around it, so mostly time, then do that.
Right. It's also because like when they do have an Orim's Chant in hand, it's kind of telegraphed based on like the slower board development and mana left up, right?
Oh yeah, for sure, for sure. You can almost always tell if they have a Orim's Chant or not.
The third matchup, and a really interesting one, was actually Esper Blink, where game 1, I identified that they were a Blink deck, so I went for a turn 2 Urani. But my opponent actually went for a Riddler blinked to chump block, and then the following turn, because the Riddler chump blocked, they attempted to go for Emperor of Bones and get the Riddler back into play and chump block it one more time. Luckily, I went for a Summoner's Pact for Endurance to Endurance their graveyard away and let me punch in lethal for Urani. However, definitely like a line where Endurance actually came up. Post board, the way I sided was like we discussed pretty intensively. 7 pacts out, the Shoal out, and because they are a consigned Solitude deck, a Xenagos out. Yeah, just basically what we already described in the previous section. Went for the package here and the disputes here, and I guess the Boseiju in this case.
Yeah, in previous builds I did not have Wistfulness, and Wistfulness is actually like better against Esper Blink than it is against Jeskai Blink because they have Overlord instead of like Flage, I guess. So it hits it. But I'm still like not quite sure. Oh no, you definitely don't got Endurance in this matchup. But yeah, so this is definitely fine, and I would probably just continue sideboarding like this just because I think that one Wistfulness is enough. Second Wistfulness is mostly there to answer problematic permanents and for Affinity.
Yep.
Anyway, and so against Esper Blink, the most important dynamic to keep in mind is that Veil of Summer is so premier against their deck. Like, it counters Thoughtseize, it counters Mystical Disputes, any other stack-based interaction that they might have. So you are looking for a lot of 7s and 6s with Veil of Summers. And if you mulligan lower, that's like such a high priority card as well because it takes a card out of their hand in Thoughtseize, which they usually try to mulligan for on turn 1, and it replaces itself, puts you up a card in that exchange. So that's a very important card, and having it improves your win rate by just so much in this matchup.
Makes sense. And yeah, game 2, I just have a note saying I went for a Urani. Even though I had like Atraxa and Oculus in hand, I was considering like a gold line, but again, playing around Consign, even though I have these 2 dead cards in my hand, just safer to go for a Urani and try and choose the win that way. Notably, there is a chance your opponent has Strategic Betrayal that can deal with Urani, but it's very common, and you can also play around that by just presenting a rider or presenting another creature next to it. And then my winning in for the top 8 was actually against Belcher, where since their mana base and since it's all the flip MDFCs, it's very telling that they're Belcher. So seeing that they're Belcher, I went for a turn 1 Allosaurus Rider beatdown plan, and that was just incredible. I put them down to a really low life total because of their mana base dealing them a lot of damage if they want their lands to be untapped as well. Allosaurus Rider early can actually force them in certain play patterns that is uncomfortable for them, where that kind of gives you an opportunity to force through a combo, especially if you have like a protection spell. The way I sided was 4 green packed out, 2 blue packed out. So let's move it here, shall we? So 4 and 2. Xenagos out because we always go for Grizzlebrand and try and do a control roll there. Shoal out and a Wistfulness out because we want to be playing more on the stack. And
You ran it, I think.
what was that?
I think you also started out Uranium. I got to sit in on the.
Oh yeah,
on the winner.
Urani is out. Sorry. And then I boarded in the Oculus package, the disputes, and I have here the 4th dispute and consign in, but I don't have them, so I have like this come in. So I'm actually over 1 card. Do I just keep in another Pact of Negation?
You can either keep it a Pact or a Wistfulness. So I remember during the games we were talking like maybe we might want to have 1 Wistfulness because in the games where they don't have the Lotus Bloom, They might, just play a Belcher to chill in there and just keep an Force of Negation up, and then you get to Wistfulness it. So yeah, it's either the second pact or the Wistfulness. It's kind of like a preference call at that point. I wouldn't blame you for either of those.
Right. What about Into the Flood more? Because I also remember like their Tameshi is just such a, let's say, low punish for them to just go for a Tameshi and pass. Similar to like going for a Belcher and pass.
I mean, yeah, Floodmaw can do that definitely, but I think it's just such a narrow card because otherwise it doesn't really do anything. So like if they go for Belcher, it probably means that you didn't have Consign, so it's going to resolve next turn. If they go for Tameshi, they might just go for the kill, and because they usually go for it a bit later in the game than in other matchups like Boros Energy where they have to go for it. They might have the extra one land to like recast the Tameshi and also get an extra card for it because it's a new object, so it gets to draw another card from Tameshi.
Right.
And it's very bad against the 2-mana creatures that have ETBs.
Yeah. And again, you've heard us say it a million times, but it's a blue card, not a green card.
Yeah.
And then the last and the most interesting matchup was against Domain Zoo. I have in notes here saying because we're such a fast combo deck, it's tricky for them to play out the threat and also hold up an interaction. So they're either forced to go all in and just fall to our combo, or they're forced to develop their threat much more slowly by holding up interaction. The dynamic that changes this significantly is whether they have Ragavan or not. But for the games they don't have Ragavan, it's important to go for a combo with 1 mana up. 1 mana up means that we can pay for a Stubborn Denial that's not turned on, or use Consign to Memory against one of their premium removal spell in Leyline Binding. Thinking of the potential of them having a Leyline Binding, or even some lists play Consign to Memory like my opponent did in the challenge in the main deck, we would prefer to go for a Urani or a Grizzlebrand over Galta. And that's exactly what I did game 1. And the way I actually was boarding, I boarded out the Mandrill, I boarded out a few Veils, not all of them, just because I wanted access. And I boarded out another card. And then I boarded in 3 Claims and 1 Floodmaw. What do you think of the overall game plan, and what do you think of the sideboard in and out?
Yeah, the game plan, I think you described it quite well. Like, just in general, I consider the main zoo a pretty easy matchup. And the reason for that is specifically that they only really have 2 to 4 relevant interactions, because Leyline Binding can easily be beaten. Their threats are quite costly except for Ragavan, so it always costs 2 mana for them to develop a threat. And if they tap out for it on turn 2, you know that their deck does not play any free interactions, so you can just go for it and usually kill them. Or, present a Grizzlebrand that's much bigger than their threat. And also just the fact that, Consign to Memory does not line up very good against you, and most of the lists are running 2 Consign and 2 Stubborn Denial, so you just don't need to be afraid of anything in this matchup. I usually don't cut the green Consign, and I just cut the 3rd Veil of Summer, and the reason for that is that it can actually work as a stifle for their land, which can actually be much more devastating for the main zoo than for other decks, especially when you are on the play, because of how clunky their threats are and how bad their mana base is. So, taking them off of another fetch land can set them back more than 1 turn.
Wow, yeah, that's definitely a really good point. In terms of the card brought in, Nature's Claim is just super efficient. Not only does it answer their threats in Leyline of the Guild Pack, or even the Draco itself, since their interaction is leaning quite heavily on the Leyline Binding, we can just let them Leyline Binding our Grizzlebrand, Nature's claim it back, and then redominate the board that way. Floodmaw is just acting as a fourth claim that's also able to regain back tempo when we're on the draw against cards like Kavu. I didn't bring in the Boseiju mainly because I didn't have any, but also I was thinking like I don't really want to cut anything else, but do you think like this Boseiju is something to consider?
Yeah, I'd bring it for a forest.
Oh, okay.
So like forest just in general. So before people used to play like one forest, one island, and the third forest would be in the sideboard for Blood Moon decks. Right now, with Boros Energy being like by far the most popular deck, I decided to put like the second forest into the main deck because I would just side it in more than half of my games anyway. And I usually when I side in Boseiju against grindy decks, I keep in the forest as well. But against these decks where you are just always going for the combo quite fast, I just don't feel the need for the extra like extra land count. So I just cut the forest and move it to the sideboard as it used to be.
Makes sense. So yeah, this is just a flex slot in your mind, basically.
Yeah, kind of.
Cool. So this swap is very important and very low opportunity to do. And I guess that's it for the video. So just to wrap up, I want to first of all thank you so much for spending time with me, talking through Uniform, and actually like even outside of the video, like teaching me the ways. So again, Universe, thank you so much for your generous time. Is there anything you want to be shouting out? Because I know you do coaching. I know you also do some deck guides that are really high yield. So do you just want to shout that out?
Yeah, Mara, thanks for having me. And yeah, you can find me on X, so it's like x.com/universemtg or Metafy. I think you have my Metafy on screen right now. And there, yeah, I do offer coaching and I occasionally do deck guides. Most of them are, just sideboard guides for like $10. But occasionally when I dive deep into like a deck, like I do with Neoform or the Pioneer Rumor deck, I do like an extensive, very long guide where I put a lot of time in it. So keep an eye out for those as well.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to say like ever since I first came across you in Spotlight Liverpool, like just being such a fun, mate to hang around, but also just such a smart, like promising young lad. Well, coming from me, that's just 1 year older, but we've gotten really close. We've gotten a lot of really deep tournament runs together, and I'm sure you'll be flying to the high stage very soon. And I just want to thank you for all your contributions you've made for not just me but also Team Worldly Council, but also I guess a good opportunity to thank Team Worldly Council for bringing so many young talents from all around the world together. And last but not least, thank you very much to Ultra Pro for sponsoring me and sponsoring the video. Right, shall we wrap it?
Yeah.
All right, see you everyone.